Most people spend their entire lives following a path they never actually chose. They wake up, make decisions, form habits, and build relationships, all while believing they are acting freely. But if you look closely at any family line, any bloodline across generations, you will find the same fears recycled, the same excuses repeated, the same invisible ceiling respected by everyone who came before. This is not a coincidence. This is a pattern. And patterns, once you understand how they work, can be broken. The first thing you need to understand is that your bloodline is not your identity. It is your starting point. There is a massive difference between the two. Your bloodline was built for survival in a world that no longer exists. The behaviors it passed down, stay safe, avoid risk, don't stand out, don't aim too high, were never designed to create power. They were designed to keep people alive under difficult conditions. But you are not living in those conditions anymore. The danger has changed. Yet the programming remains, quietly controlling decisions, limiting ambition, and quietly eroding potential in generation after generation. What makes this particularly dangerous is that no one announces it. There is no written rulebook, no formal instruction. The pattern spreads through observation, through imitation, through emotional atmosphere. Children absorb the fears of their parents before they even have the language to question them. They inherit not just names and traditions, but the psychological architecture of limitation. And because it feels familiar, it feels like truth. It feels like reality. It isn't. Niccolò Machiavelli wrote that greatness is never inherited. It is seized, built, and forced into existence through sustained, deliberate effort. History reinforces this. Every person who ever broke a generational pattern had to first do something deeply uncomfortable. They had to study their own origin with the cold, analytical eye of a strategist, rather than the protective loyalty of a family member. They had to look at where people in their bloodline consistently gave up, not in dramatic moments, but in the small daily decisions where comfort was chosen over growth, where fear quietly won, where long-term vision was traded for short-term safety. This kind of analysis is not disrespect, it is precision. When you can clearly see where weakness repeats across generations, where people stopped pushing when things became difficult, where they lowered standards to avoid conflict, where they chose approval over excellence, you gain something most people never have: a map of exactly what not to do. Awareness alone, however, is not enough. Plenty of people recognize the pattern and still follow it. The difference between those who break cycles and those who repeat them is what happens after recognition. Awareness without replacement is meaningless. You don't just remove the old pattern, you install something stronger in its place. Fear gets replaced by calculated risk-taking. Comfort gets replaced by disciplined structure. Inconsistency gets replaced by systems that operate independent of motivation. One of the deepest anchors keeping people locked in inherited patterns is the need for approval. It operates so quietly that most people never identify it as a force controlling their life. But examine any decision made to avoid judgment, any idea held back to preserve harmony, any ambition quietly shrunk to fit other people's expectations, and you will find it. The desire to be accepted is not weakness, it is human. But when it begins to override your direction, it becomes a cage. The moment you need someone else's validation to move forward, you have handed them control of your trajectory. Real. Power requires freedom, and freedom cannot coexist with the need for external permission. Breaking free from approval. Seeking is not about becoming cold or isolated. It is about becoming selective. It is about reaching a point where being misunderstood does not shake your foundation, where being judged does not interrupt your execution, where the withdrawal of social approval does not send you retreating to familiar but limiting ground. Most people fail precisely at this point. They feel the discomfort of being different, of standing outside the consensus, and they go back. Not because going back is better, but because it is accepted. That is the test. And passing it is what separates the people who transform their bloodline from the people who merely complain about it. Understanding perception is equally critical, and far fewer people grasp this than they should. Reality matters, your skills, your output, your discipline, but perception is what determines how that reality is received by the world. If you reveal everything, if you explain every plan and expose every vulnerability in an effort to be understood, you give others a complete map of how to predict, influence, or undermine you. Strategic restraint is not deception, it is discipline. Silence creates pressure. Controlled expression creates authority. Unpredictability keeps others attentive and respectful, while constant emotional availability makes you forgettable. The goal is not to be fake. The goal is to be intentional about what you share, when you share it, and with whom. The same principle applies to your relationships and to how you invest your time and energy. Every interaction contains influence and positioning, whether you acknowledge it or not. Most people enter relationships driven entirely by emotion, trusting too quickly, sharing too much, giving access too freely, and then struggle to understand why they repeatedly end up surrounded by people who slow them down rather than elevate them. The solution is not cynicism. It is structure. You observe first. You watch how people behave under pressure, whether they respect their own commitments, whether their patterns suggest alignment or risk. You become selective about who receives your deepest attention and energy, because those people will directly shape your thinking, your standards, and your direction. Scarcity is one of the least discussed but most powerful tools available to anyone building long-term influence. When you are always available, always responsive, always visible, your presence loses weight. People stop noticing it because it is always there. But when you become selective, when you choose your moments deliberately, when you speak less and mean more, when you appear in specific contexts rather than all of them, your presence begins to carry significance. Not because you have engineered it artificially, but because what is rare is naturally valued. Your attention, your energy, and your time are finite resources. Every time you give them without discrimination, you dilute the impact of every future investment. The ultimate aim of all of this, the pattern recognition, the approval detachment, the strategic perception management, the disciplined scarcity, is not personal achievement for its own sake. It is legacy. Not the soft, sentimental version of legacy that fades within a generation, but the structural kind, the kind that changes direction. Your name, built correctly, becomes a reference point, a standard that people measure against, a line in your family's history between what was and what will never be again. That does not happen by accident. It happens through consistent, long-term, vision-driven action, through building systems that outlast your direct effort, through influencing how people think and decide long after any single interaction has ended. Every day, your name is being shaped by what you do, what you tolerate, and what you choose to build. It is not formed at some future moment of arrival. It is formed right now in ordinary decisions, in the gap between comfort and discipline, between approval and direction. The question is not whether your bloodline will remember you. The question is whether what you build will matter to people who never even met you. That is the real measure. And the only person capable of creating that outcome is the one reading this right now. Your bloodline does not need another member. It needs a turning point. Be that.